Welcome back. We are in our next section on features of religion called Higher Order and Purpose. So let's read. Religion believes and teaches that life has a higher order and purpose, greater than the order and purpose in the world that we perceive, the natural world, the common sense world. Religion teaches there's something beyond that. Why does religion teach that? Why is the natural world not sufficient? Why do we seek a higher order? The natural world is characterized by disorder, especially moral chaos and injustice. This deeply offends us. We see bad things happening to good people, good things happening to bad people. Sometimes the way things happen, there just is no satisfying explanation for, and yet we still seek one. But when we can't find any sense of order, this leads to a sense of meaninglessness and purposelessness. Order. Humans are order-seeking and order-producing. I'm not just talking about being well organized. We put my socks in this drawer and my underwear in this drawer. We're talking about the idea that we want the world to make sense. Humans seek to project some kind of paradigm on the world in which all things will make sense. Everything will fit into some kind of pattern. We have some kind of an idea that in a situation like this, we can count on this to happen. And yet, when it comes to areas of perfect justice, areas of meaning and purpose, it just doesn't work that way. All of the paradigms humans have ever come up with to try to understand the way the world is have broken down. And religious leaders spend a great deal of their time, by the way, explaining why these paradigms have broken down in certain ways. In the last video, we talked about the beautiful little child being run down by the drunk driver. Well, certainly, we want to know that, there's a reason for this. There's a meaning for this. Our whole sense of order has been violated. Our whole sense of justice has been violated. And we want some kind of an answer as to why. But all answers that can be given are arbitrary. There's no way of proving which ones are right. I could give you 5 or 6 different reasons that maybe God would allow this to happen or will for this to happen. But there's no way that you can know which one is the right answer. Generally, people are going to accept some kind of an answer, though, because they need to have a sense of meaning and purpose. Humans seek meaning and purpose. Humans create meaning and purpose. Other animals don't do this. We talked about this a couple of videos back. Humans assign value based on ethical or aesthetic ideals. Okay? What does this mean? If something horrible happens, if I get a phone call and my significant other just got run down by a drunk driver, much like the poor little girl in my story before, I want to know why. I mean, it could have been anybody. Why her? I mean, she had so much to offer. So many people considered her a blessing. There were so many other people that could have been run down by a drunk driver, and it would be a lot less of a loss. Why her? And of course, I have statistics. I mean, if you could break it down, there's a 1,572,423 chances that, but that doesn't give us any kind of satisfaction. I want to know that her death means something. I'm going to create meaning. I'll make it mean something. Maybe I'll start another chapter of PADD, Professors Against Drunk Drivers. I'll make sure that her name lives on. I'll make sure that people in the future may experience some kind of deliverance or healing or comfort or some kind of support through an organization that bears her name, so I can say that her death ended up being a blessing to so many other people. And what I've done is I've made her life mean something. We seek meaning and purpose. It is unacceptable to us to believe that something this horrible can happen and something so valuable can be lost, and there's no reason why. It doesn't mean anything. There's no purpose. It's just random. It's arbitrary. This is something that's very offensive to us. Now, there are some people who do believe this. We call them philosophical atheists. And a lot of them are very good people, by the way. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a little bit, but let's set this aside for now. Suffice to say that those who believe this, if they're educated and they've done their research and they've really thought out their beliefs well, they probably have some idea that this constant search for meaning and purpose, this constant search to know why her, why me, is making us crazy. And the atheist thinks that if we could, not be so obsessive about having to have a reason for everything, or try to find some sacred meaning to it, that we would have a higher quality of life. We wouldn't be in so much existential anxiety all the time. And perhaps they have a point. So we assign meaning and purpose. We assign value. The ultimate valuation is the idea of something that is sacred. It can be an idea, a belief. It can be a practice, an object, a place, a time. But when you say that something is sacred, you're saying that the meaning and purpose of that thing comes from the ultimate. Okay? In some sense, something that is sacred is inviolable. The meaning it has is not just a practical meaning. Okay? It's not just something that works for util functions in this life. It has a higher meaning, and it must be respected for the higher meaning it has. Okay? In the case we were just talking about, my loved one's death is not going to be meaningless. I'm going to make it into something sacred. It is going to be something that has a higher meaning than what really happened in that particular tragic incident. And we see many examples of sacredness, and we're going to talk a lot more about them in just a little bit. Justice. We mentioned humans seek justice. It's interesting, humans can conceive of perfect justice, but it's never existed in the world at any time in history. But yet we can conceive of it. And, the kid that gets beat up after school and the bully takes his lunch money. Well, actually, I guess he'd have to get beat up before school for the bully to take his lunch money, right? Okay, I'll change my story here. But my point is, you don't have to sit down with the kid and say, look, I know you probably thought it was a lot of fun to get beat up and have your lunch money stolen, but believe it or not, that was actually a bad thing. That never had to be explained to any kid ever. Okay? We seem to know what perfect justice is. When we're wronged, we know that's wrong. We also have some conception of what perfect love is. A love that does something that's best for another person without considering what is good for ourselves. And you might think that exists, but it really doesn't. If you want to talk about selfless love, that would mean that you'd have to have no idea of self. See, I can give all of my money, say, to feed the poor. And maybe I have real compassion for the poor. Maybe I was homeless at one time. But I'm always making a decision what kind of self I'm going to be. Okay? I want to be the kind of self that would give my money to feed the poor. And so maybe I really care about the poor, but I also care about what kind of self I'm going to be. So you can never say that any action is really without any kinds of conditions. You can never say something is really selfless. We use the term to mean that maybe I am foregoing some kind of benefit I could have by spending my money on someone else rather than spending it on myself. But to say it's a selfless endeavor, literally, is actually not quite true. Okay? I'm deciding what kind of self I want to be. So, back to our point. Perfect justice, unconditional love. We think about it. We judge everything according to these standards. And when things that offend us deviate from the standards of perfect justice or unconditional love, we can point right out what's wrong and we can tell you that it's wrong. Where do we get this idea from? We're not going any farther with that, because if we got theists and atheists into a conversation about how humans get this idea of what perfect justice is, we would have quite a difference of opinion. My point now is just to point out that we do have this idea of perfect justice. And so when we see the world exhibiting moral chaos, that bothers us. We would like to have a place where truth is always true, where these good standards always are seen to be stable. Nothing changes. And so we imagine an unconditioned, that means there's no conditions that change the reality today from what it was yesterday. An unconditioned, unchanging, ideal reality that is always true, where no chaos, injustice, or suffering exists, where no unexpected moral chaos is going to rear its ugly head. And whether you believe in heaven or you believe in nirvana, or whether you're thinking about your final goal or just what the ultimate reality is, all religions have something in common, and that is the ultimate reality does not have anything present that causes suffering, does not have anything present that is unjust. If you think of the idea of the new heaven and the new earth, for instance, in Christianity, there's no more sorrow, there's no more crying, there's no more suffering, there's no more disease, there's no more death, there's no more warfare, there's no more competition. All of these things that hurt people, we are looking for a reality where these things don't exist. And all religions have that in common. They look at this life and they see that it is very unsatisfactory. And since it is unsatisfactory, we think of what kind of a world would be satisfactory, and that we posit that it must exist somewhere. The kind of the heart of religious thinking is, if I can imagine perfect justice, it must exist somewhere. Where? If I can imagine perfect love, it must exist somewhere. Where? Or how about this? If I can ask a question why, and that question is crucial, then the answer must exist somewhere. That's kind of the religious aspect of humans right there. Some people call it homo religiosus. We are the animal that is incurably religious. We're always asking why. There must be an answer somewhere. And so if I can ask the question and it seems like it is critical, the answer must exist. Or you can look at it in terms of desire, when you're seeking fulfillment or meaning or purpose. C.S. Lewis had a quote that's interesting. He said, "If I find in myself a desire that nothing in this world can satisfy, the most likely explanation is that I was made for another world." Here we see an example of that same kind of thinking. If I have a desperate need, and that need does not exist in this world, then there must be some other place where that need exists, and that's where I want to be. That's the reality I want to connect with. So, all religions in some way are going to teach that there is a higher order and purpose. There is a meaning that transcends what things mean in this world. There's an order that transcends whatever sense of order we can find in this world. Okay? Now, world-transcending concepts of the higher order are understood and communicated through symbolism, we'll talk about below. But if you're thinking about a reality that we've never experienced before, well, then we don't have any concepts that we can focus on. We don't have any words to explain it. We can't define it or delineate it. So we use symbolism, things that we've experienced, to talk about what this higher order is like. And we'll talk more about symbolism just a little bit farther below. When we go to the very next section here, still under higher order and purpose, I have a quote here from a man named William James, who wrote a famous book called The Varieties of Religious Experience. If you end up studying religious phenomenology, human religious experience, the phenomenon of religious experience, this book will probably be a staple, even though it was written a century ago. William James was a psychologist, a philosopher as well, who studied human religious experience. And in this book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, compiles stories from many different people about these supernatural experiences they had that definitively changed their lives for the better. When we talk about religious experience, that's one of the things that is our criteria for esteeming something a religious experience, and that is, it must be something that has affected every area of the person's life in a positive way, not just what they do at 11 o'clock on a Sunday, but it's changed the way they see themselves, and why they are and their purpose in the world, and in that it's changed the way they respond to everything. And secondly, it must be enduring. We must be able to say, look at this person 5 years later and see that whatever basic change happened after their religious experience, they've continued going in a different direction. They haven't returned right back to where they were before. Otherwise, we would call this a fad, a temporary fixation on something. And today, that's common. Someone will say, oh my God, it changed my life. And then 6 months later, they barely remember what happened. So, to consider something a religious experience, has to be something that has changed a person's entire life, the way they see their life in general, and it must be an enduring experience. So all of the things in William James's book kind of fit this criteria. Anyway, I don't want to talk about his book right now, though we will mention William James later. William James has a very interesting definition or description of religion here. He says, religion consists of the belief that there is an unseen order, and that our supreme good lies in harmoniously adjusting ourselves thereto. And while that is grammatically correct, most of us don't talk that way today, our supreme good, and therefore our supreme goal, would be in getting in harmony with the unseen order. That would be the best thing, to be in harmony with the unseen order. Now, this is a wonderful definition of religion for reasons we'll talk about a little bit later here. But suffice to say here that wow, thunder. And here comes the rain. We're in Florida. It happens every day right about this time, right around 4. Anyway, this implies some things. I've made the quote a little bit smaller here so we can talk about this here. First of all, belief in an unseen order. We're not just talking about something we see with our eyes. We're talking about an order that isn't perceived at all by any of our natural senses. We can't see it, hear it. We can't even think about it. It transcends our experience and therefore our ability to conceive of it. So belief in an unseen order implies some things I want to point out here, because this is true in all religions in some sense. Number one, the seen order, that is the perceived order of this world, is somehow inferior and unsatisfactory. Of course, for all the reasons that we just got done talking about. While the unseen order is definitely superior. So why is the seen world inferior? Besides the fact of moral chaos and suffering and all of this good stuff, there's another aspect here that all religions in some way teach or believe, and that is that the perceived world is somehow illusory. In other words, it's not ultimately real. Illusory has the same root as the word illusion. It seems very real, but if you treat this as the ultimate reality, the real world, you'll never be in harmony with the unseen world. If you are in harmony with this world, that's not the ideal state. This world is not ultimately real. Now, there are different ways of talking about how the world is illusory. Hinduism, for instance, says that what we're experiencing isn't really real at all. Because of the limitations of our perception, we have to treat this world as if it's real, because it's all we can perceive. But if we think that we're perceiving the world the way it really is, we're in ignorance. Okay? In monotheism, the illusory nature of the world may not be so much that what we're experiencing isn't true right now, but it's not ultimately true because it's very, very temporary. There's going to come a time when this temporary world is going to be done with, and so it would be much better for you if you were in harmony with that eternal world that continues on. Now, as far as the illusory nature of the world, one of the things that's really interesting about monotheism is the world is not just illusory, but it is, in a sense, deceptive. Because in monotheism, unlike other religions, there is assumed to be a cosmic battle between good and evil. And monotheistic religions imagine some kind of a nemesis or detractor from God, a Satan or whatever, who really wants to deceive you, who wants you to treat this world as if it is the real world. But if you do, and you embrace it, and you get attached to it, and you live according to its values, monotheism would teach you you're going to be lost. So, illusory in some way in all religions, deceptive in the monotheistic religions in addition. Secondly, the perceived world is illusory in another way, and that is when we're talking about not the natural world. The word world can be used in different ways, but the human world, that is the world that humans create. What do we call that? We call that society and culture. And that world is artificial. Artificial means, well, you can define it two ways. You can say it is of human creation, or you can say it is not naturally occurring. The building I am in now is an artifice. It was created by humans. Nobody would look at the building and wonder what kind of earthquake or volcano created the building. It would be obvious it was created by human beings. So it's not naturally occurring. If we're talking about the world that human beings create, we're talking about society and culture. That is the world that we see. Okay? But it is illusory. The human world of society and culture is not ultimately real, and we live by its standards. But its standards are not eternal standards. Its standards are not ultimate standards. Whatever your conception of God or the afterlife or whatever, wearing stripes and checks at the same time is not a faux pas in heaven. Who knows if stripes and checks even exist? Okay? People may not shake hands when they meet for the first time. Hey, people may not even have hands. So in our world, which we live according to, and we have to live according to, it's the only world we know, we still should maintain the understanding that it's not ultimately the real world. It's not the ultimate reality, and we shouldn't get too attached to it. We have to live in the world, but it's not the world that we should be in harmony with. If we're in harmony with the seen order, we are going to have a much lower quality of life and presumably a worse outcome than if we get in harmony with the unseen order. The supreme good, or the supreme goal of attaining harmony with the unseen order, also implies not only that the unseen order produces a better quality of life, and that the seen order clearly produces an inferior, unsatisfactory quality of life, but it also implies that humans are not naturally in harmony with the unseen, ultimate reality. Now, there's many different explanations for it, but religions must explain if this disharmony is the normal state of humans, or if it's not the normal state of humans, when and how this alienation occurred. So if you're a monotheist, people might tell you about the 3rd chapter of Genesis, where this lady named Eve made a very bad dietary choice for dinner one night that caused an alienation from God that humans have been trying to overcome since then. We're going to see many different ideas of how we are alienated from the ultimate, whether it was that way in the beginning, whether it was something that happened later, whether it's our natural state or not, whether we have to transcend our natural state to achieve a harmony we've never known before, speaking of us in general as humans, many different ways of looking at it. But attaining harmony with the ultimate is the ultimate good. And so religions will explain what kind of positive transformation is to be expected if you can attain this harmony with the ultimate. So again, we've mentioned this a couple other places. Religion is going to be helping you to try to establish a connection, a relationship, a harmony with the ultimate reality, or the ultimate truth, or the ultimate power, or ultimate being. And we expect a positive transformation in our lives as a result of that. Alrighty? We are going to move on now to the next section, where we're going to talk about transformation power and symbolism, and I will see you there.